Good morning. Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining us for the second day of the African Youth Summit on Biodiversity. My name is Smangeli Msweli, Senior Manager of the Youth Leadership Program at the African Wildlife Foundation, and I'm happy to be moderating yet another session. Today, we are, however, starting with discussing the state of biodiversity in Africa. Specifically, we are going to look at the marine side, and we are going to touch briefly on the terrestrial side of things as well. But before we begin, I would love to go through some few housekeeping notices. Please note that we have translation for this session, but it's only available in the Zoom platform. In order to access it, you should have a tab that is written interpretation. If you click on it, you will see the option to choose either English or French. Please pick your preferred language. For those on that side is putting the link for you now for joining. We would love to encourage you to rename come from. So please rename so that we can see your name and the country that you come from. Again, of this summit, including the speakers, including the exhibition stands, the virtual ones that feature about 20 organizations, are available in the conference website, which is on Emmet. If you are registered, all you need to do is to log in, and then you're going to see what else is coming up today, and you are able to put it in your calendar. Lastly, but not least, in housekeeping, we would love to hear from you. We would love to see your engagement. So please feel free to put your questions in the chat box in either of the platforms. And also, we encourage you to tweet, write on Facebook and LinkedIn about the key lessons and your experience in the summit. And as you do that, remember to be using the hashtag of the African Youth Summit on Biodiversity, which is hashtag AYSP 2022. Now, moving on to the actual program, I am not alone. I am joined by speakers who have expertise in the topic today, who will unpack for us the state of biodiversity in Africa, the challenges, but more importantly, the opportunities as well. And you will have an opportunity to engage with them and ask some questions. So to start off, I would love to welcome Dr. Oku, who's joining us from Kenya, who's a senior researcher at the Kenya Marine and Fisheries Research Institute, who's also the president of Western Indian Ocean Marine Science Association. Welcome, Doc, and kindly give us a presentation on the states of marine biodiversity in Africa.
Thank you very much. I feel very honored to be on this platform speaking to young people. Just allow me to share my screen and then we can proceed to share what I have in store, I have prepared. I'm excited to go through the state of marine biodiversity in Africa, particularly in the marine fields. And preparing this talk has just helped me revisit a lot of dimensions of the marine space. And I'm very happy to take you through a walk through those spaces. They're spaces that those that work in the marine environment are very familiar with. And what I'll start with showing is the habitats of the space. I'll go into specific issues of biodiversity in each of the different spaces that I've described. And then we'll look at the threats to that biodiversity and the opportunities and the things we are doing in our field to maintain and sustain the richness of our oceans. We are in a blue economy season where the dialogue is sustainability, use, extraction of our blue economy. And so this talk is put into that context to help us understand what we could lose if we do not sustainably use the ocean. When you come to the marine space, you'll see many things. You'll see mangrove forests, those are, and then I'll explain what they are. We have intertidal flats as it gets deeper. You'll see coral reefs, you'll see a lot of fish, a lot of animals. And each habitat has a characteristic feature that is unique to itself. So I'll begin by just going through the different spaces. I'll try to be slow to help us get into the sea together. One thing I thought is important for us to be conscious about is the water column. The ocean is vast, it's blue waters, but in that water, we have diverse phytoplankton, zooplankton, small microscopic organisms. You see them with a microscope that drift in the water column. Sometimes we find eggs of marine animals, also larval stages of larger animals. So fish larvae will swim in the planktonic stage. And many animals have a planktonic phase in their life cycle.
Yeah.
And then there also...
Sorry to disturb you.
Yes.
It's not on presentation mode on my side.
Okay, sometimes I have that problem. It's moving for me. Has it moved for you?
It hasn't moved for me.
Okay, then we can revert
if it's
to the
moving on your side.
presentation I shared with Cherise. I shared a presentation with her, so we can quickly switch to that one. Sometimes this tends to happen, yeah. Cherise, is that okay with you?
Yes, that is okay. Just
Thank you
Sorry
so
for
much.
that. It tends to happen, so we try to be prepared sometimes.
No, that's fine. Thanks.
We just wait a bit. Cherise will share that. But it's good to see that we have 14 of us attending the session. And I hope the presentation teaches us something new about the ocean space. I know we visit it often. Many of us look forward to coming out to the beach. And I think in this talk, I'll try to show you that the beach is just not the sand. It's a lot more than just the sand. And hopefully raise awareness of what we need to look at in this space. Sorry, my phone is not on mute. Let me just do that as we come up. I got, okay, good. So this is, it's on a, yeah, it's on a PDF. So maybe, yeah, maybe it will go on slideshow. Let's see. Okay, good. Yeah.
We also have 32 people that are joining us from EMIT. So people are also following your presentation from EMIT as well. But over to you.
Karibuni, as we say in Kiswahili, from this part of the world. Can you hear me now better? Hello. So we were there looking at the different zones of the marine space, the mangrove, the seagrass space, and the coral reefs. But I'll start with the water, and we can move to the next slide, where the next slide. where I was describing the water column and just indicating that the water is not just blue water that is empty. It has a great deal of microscopic organisms that drift in that water. They're known as zooplankton. Those are animals. Phytoplankton, they're photosynthetic creatures that photosynthesize. You'll find eggs, you'll find larval stages of larger animals. And we also find that many animals or marine animals are adapted to feeding on these zooplankton and phytoplankton, especially in the early stages of their lives. And many animals have a planktonic stage in their life cycle. Can move to the next. So that is the biodiversity, numerous and countless organisms. We like to go onto beaches. We love the beach. I know in Kenya, we pack our bags with a lot of excitement to head out to beaches, and we have beautiful beaches. The beach itself is made up of sand that is generated from broken pieces of coral. You'll find integrated in there river sand, coralline algae, and smaller phytos known as diatoms. Beaches are also rich in biodiversity on themselves as a standalone feature. They host birds, crabs, sandhoppers. We have sea turtles also relying on beaches for nesting purposes. So beaches are also equally deeply diverse, with several organisms, which sometimes you only see at certain periods, like at night or early in the morning. You may find holes for different types of worm creatures. And so beaches too have a wealth of biodiversity that they have to offer. Next slide. We move to the next zone. The topography of the land is. And mangroves are trees that grow in the salt water. Species. They provide a nursery ground for fish, so their diversity hosted will be fish-based, crustaceans, crabs, such as crabs. One important feature about mangroves is that they provide a barrier to land, on the land, and they prevent soil erosion and also strong winds and cyclones. And we've seen this barrier being very effective during tsunamis in many parts of the world, and that is documented. Mangroves are used for poles for construction, fencing, firewood, dyes, medicines, and charcoal. And all these things are important for this particular ecosystem. Next slide. As we move deeper into the water, we find seagrass beds. And if you have been at the beach, you'll find seagrasses in our part of the world. We have 12 species. This is in East Africa. But as we move perhaps southwards, the species become fewer. They become monospecific. We also have vulnerable seagrass species in the midst of seagrass beds. And seagrasses are known to anchor sediments, just like grasses on land. They provide a nursery ground, a habitat for fish. We find many important invertebrates. We collect shells from seagrasses, starfish, crabs, sea cucumbers. And like mangroves, they're known to be habitats that take up carbon from the ecosystem because they're plants. And so we characterize them as blue carbon ecosystems or environments, which are tremendously important in this era of climate change and high carbon emissions. So sustaining these habitats has been a rally call worldwide, simply because of their carbon harvesting abilities. Next slide. We move deeper, we have shallow and deeper coral reefs. Some grow at 1 meter to deeper locations. They are built of coral polyps. They are comprised of coral polyps and other calcium depositing plants and animals. Often corals will look like a stone, they'll look dead, but the photo below shows you that it is actually an animal that excretes a calcium carbonate skeleton on the outside. And they're very diverse. In Kenya, we've recorded over 250 coral species, and we still are documenting more, and they have uncountable species of fish and other organisms, and we still do not have a full tally or a full count of the diversity of coral reefs. And they form extensive fishing grounds. They are targeted for octopus, for lobster, for fish, and many other marine organisms. Next slide. We experience extreme threats to the marine ecosystem. And one thing I keep on saying is that a lot of the threats start on land and move seawards. We see plastic pollution, marine pollution, and it starts on land. Changes in the pH and ocean acidification simply because of high carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, pollution coming into the sea, ocean warming, that is a natural climate change issue where the oceans are becoming warmer. So we've seen drastic changes, and I'll go into just the next slide that shows some of the drivers of the changes and what is happening at the different levels of the ecosystem. So in the water column, we find drivers include pollution from sewage, oil spills, ocean acidification, and the diversity is declining. We have species that are characteristic of places that are impacted by these drivers. On the beaches, to our properties at the beach, we have people trampling overusing beach areas, and sedimentation from agricultural practices, poor agricultural practices on land. When we move towards the mangroves, we find pollution also is an impact, oil spills are an impact. But here, because mangroves provide wood, we are losing a lot of the mature trees for building and firewood. And these areas are also cleared for salt production. So every time you get salt, especially in areas along the East African coast, it has come from ponds that have been established in mangrove areas. And obviously, to create the ponds, we have to clear the mangroves. Move to the next slide. Drivers of biodiversity loss in seagrass areas are also pollution, oil spills, sedimentation, where sediment comes and smothers the grasses. We also have incidences of overfishing. So keystone fish are removed from the food chain. And that means when you remove the higher level predators from the food chain because of fishing, then the organisms that they predate on increase in number. And we've seen this in many places along the coast. We also have biodiversity loss in coral reefs. And here specifically, the natural climate issues of temperature increment has led to coral bleaching. So corals die, they expel the live organism that is within the skeleton, and they begin to die. We have overfishing, tourism pressure, where tourists visit these reefs and trample on them and cause breakage, ocean acidification that impacts the calcification processes in these areas. So those are the drivers of biodiversity loss that we've documented, and there may be others that we just have not been able to document and will emerge with time. We can move to the next slide. I was asked to just reflect a bit on the opportunities to reverse this biodiversity loss. And in my opinion, the first thing is knowledge, building capacity to do scientific studies in areas that are very unique to marine and water bodies, in oceanography, fisheries, as well as environmental studies, and the linkages between all these areas of study are important. And often the challenge is getting wet. For young people, we may not want to get wet. It's safer to be on land. But we have young people that are extremely passionate about the sea and are getting wet and learning how to understand the biodiversity, how to begin to provide solutions to averting the loss. As scientists, we need to be multi-skilled to be able to do science in varying environments using different resources and equipment. We need to be creative. The equipment that is used in Europe may not be available in our context. So we need to modify things and be innovative to do similar work or even better work. We need to use international best practices and also modern tools, and we are able to link up with labs that provide molecular tools that help us to screen for biodiversity. What I've shown you are things that we can see, but there is a lot that often is hidden. If I swam in an environment with fish, there are fish that I will see during the day. I may not see them in the night, yet I'm not out in the night. So you have fish that are nocturnal that may be missed simply because I did my sampling at a time when they don't come out. And so using tools like environmental DNA is important in getting a bigger picture and a wider picture of our diversity. The last thing I would like to say is that we need to communicate, especially to the next and the current generation, through citizen science programs and ocean literacy, and use different tools. I believe the more tools that we employ to educate people about the ocean and the loss of its biodiversity, the better educated we will be and the better informed we will be in the practices that we adopt. We find that in Europe, from a very young age, children have access to cartoon books like Tintin, and that already changes their mindset. They begin to aspire differently. In our context, the African context, our aspirations are limited by what we see. And so I think it's important that we begin communicating a lot of the things we see in the ocean, in our environment, in ways that are attractive to different levels in our community. Next slide. The other thing we have done, especially at the level of government, is establish marine protected areas. And in Kenya, we have 6 fully fledged marine protected areas. And this is an effort to contain areas that are high in biodiversity, to safeguard them. And we have full protected areas, some established since 1960s. What we are seeing over the last 10 years is the move by communities to safeguard community conservation areas so that they're able to continue harvesting resources. So we have listed areas where this work is happening. There's Pate Island in Lamu, and different areas within the Lamu region, Faza region, where 3 beach management units have come together to safeguard their resources. We have 7 beach management units that have come together in the South Coast in Shiboni Vanga region to begin conserving areas that are unique to them, either for species or for habitat. So we have movements where communities are closing areas for octopus, closing areas for different aspects, so that they're able to give those species the opportunity to regenerate. So there's closure for in time, and there's also closure for space in space use. Next slide. The other thing that we've been doing, obviously, from the earlier part of the presentation, I've showed you that there are areas that are severely degraded. And we've been working with communities on restoration programs underwater. So we've done restoration programs in seagrass, restoration programs in coral reefs, mostly experimental from a scientific point of view to be able to understand what works and what can be pushed forward as tools that we can use rapidly to restore areas that are in deep need for restoration. So this is work that is happening. And as we restore, we see areas transforming from very bare areas where we had no fish coming in, no organisms coming in, to areas that are fully inhabited by corals or seagrass, and fish begin to populate these areas. And that is good for livelihoods. And communities are advocating for some of these methods in areas that they feel are degraded. Next slide. We are also in Kenya pioneering blue carbon ecosystem programs, where we are working around conservation, especially in the mangrove forests. We have ecotourism programs that are community-based, that are community-led. We have a very popular one in the North Coast in a place known as the Crab Shack. If you Google the Crab Shack, you'll see a restaurant in the middle of a mangrove forest, a resource center for students in the middle of a mangrove forest with a boardwalk. And that is a community initiative, community livelihood support for ecotourism. And they have conserved that mangrove forest for several years and kept it in a stage where there are mature trees that can be found and restored areas that have been degraded. We also work on payment for ecosystem service projects in mangrove forests. We have a very popular one known as Mukoko Pamoja in Gazi Bay. You can Google that, where over 20 years ago, restoration work began to begin to restore a forest in this region. Today, this forest has matured and communities get carbon credits. They sell the carbon credits on the carbon market, and they're beneficiaries for carbon credits, which support their livelihoods and support education in some of these communities. And we've been expanding this program beyond Gazi Bay into the south and now also into Tanzania. Next slide. A lot of the research we do in the marine sector goes into development of management plans for fisheries, as well as policies. So we don't do the data collection and it ends up on a desk. We try as much as possible to develop management plans. We have a national mangrove management plan. We have coral reef and seagrass conservation strategy, and we want to upgrade it into a management plan. We also have all of these provide information that goes into legislation. So if you open any of our acts such as the Fisheries Management and Development Act, you'll find and guidelines to support conservation. We have registered in Kenya to begin a marine spatial planning process. And that is planning our oceans, our resources, even as we enhance fisheries and aquaculture. We are able to safeguard and provide spaces for different actions and different activities. So that is something that we are using. And that process, we hope, will continue to safeguard biodiversity. And I'm leading the process as the National Marine Spatial Planning Coordinator currently for Kenya. The next slide. As I'm talking to youth, I would like to just highlight what type of opportunities are available in this field. And it's an open field for all types of skills. Whether you want to stay on land or whether you want to dive into the water, it's really, your choice. And at the Western Indian Ocean Marine Science Association, we have an early career scientist network. We're also focusing on supporting women and enhancing their inclusion in marine science, in increasing the number of women that participate in this field and trying to remove barriers for this work. So we have a Women in Marine Science network. For those interested in marine protected areas, we have a Western Indian Ocean Marine Protected Area network as well. And we are preparing ourselves to attend the WIOMSA Scientific Symposium that will be held in 2022 in South Africa, and I've hosted the link there. For anyone interested, you may be in South Africa, close to the venue, do attend and get to know what can we apply maybe from the terrestrial field in conservation biology in University in Nairobi. And what was interesting is that conservation biology was a terrestrial-based degree. But when I got in there, I took the option of working in the seagrass environment in the ocean. And I was able to apply a lot of the skills from that terrestrial training into the marine field. And we still look at what theories, the theoretical frameworks for ecology that are mostly terrestrial, and look at the applications into the marine field. Those who are listening in and participating to check out the space and see what can this space offer them. On activities of young people. So if you look at the most current one, you see what young people are doing across the region. WIOMSA is an association that cuts across 10 countries, all the way from Somalia to South Africa and the island states. So this brings me to the end of my talk, maybe the last slide that will give you contacts and links of where you could find us. So my home institution has a website. You can look and see what we do on a daily basis as marine scientists. And WIOMSA is the Association for Marine Scientists that helps us with our career development, our capacity building needs, and helps us with networking across the region and globally. So I'd like to stop there and thank you all for your attention. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Ogu. We'll have time for questions later, but there's a question that came in that I'm happy to direct to you now as the next speaker gets ready. It came from Daniel. It says, I in Goma, where the houses are up to a few centimeters from the lake, at this level, there's a lot of human waste that flows directly into the lake, fecal matter, etc. What dangers will this present in the long term?
That is a very interesting question, Daniel, and I thank you for that question. What you'll find is that the lake will begin to experience eutrophication, but it depends on the size of the lake. It depends whether this lake has an outlet. If it has an outlet, you'll find an inlet and an outlet, you'll find that there is recirculation and refreshment of the water. But if it's a lake that is very, very stagnant, then pretty soon you'll find there's an impact on the plankton in the water. There's an impact on the marine plants in that water, because lakes do have their own set of plants. And you'll soon find an impact on the fish that are eaten, either diseases, because there are fish diseases, either changing in things are good, but in the long term, this is something that communities need to revisit and determine how best to handle waste matter in that region.
Thank you so much on the next, but we are aware that there is the IPBES assessment that did assessments for Africa at a regional level, inclusive of the terrestrial side of things. To give us insights into this, I would love to invite Dr. Diaw, who is joining us from Senegal and is the Deputy Director General of the consortium, the enterprise. Dr. Diaw, over to you. Welcome and thank you so much for joining us.
I'm presenting the result of the Africa assessment that lasted from 3 years, about a little bit more than 3 years, and that was published in 2018. Is the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. And next slide, please, because I don't have the control. I don't know how it. Can I get the next slide? Do you hear me?
Yes, on my side, it has moved. It's on the slide of the main points from the assessment.
Yeah, I'd let you move the slide. But they,
Okay.
yeah, there are more slides than there are a lot of slides that I sent you just to give you more. But we want to be able to go through each and every slide, and there are 4 parts in this presentation. In itself, I'm going to present it very briefly. The contribution people in Africa, and the nature of the biodiversity potential in Africa. And this is the evaluation team. It's very diverse. Next slide. We worked 3 years. An extremely, good group of people, extreme experts. Can you move on? And basically, we had an African expertise that was of Anglophones in Africa. Mainly, you're going too fast. There are people from Southern Africa in particular, and from Kenya. And so the assessment is 6 chapters. And a summary for policymakers. And I would really advise to go to the chapters, because there's a lot of information in there that is not in the summary for policymakers. Okay, and basically the subject drivers, and until we get to the presentation, the scenarios for nature, and that would talk to one of the questions that was raised to my predecessor. Please understand the narrative structure of the Africa assessment. It's moving too much. I don't, guys. Can you come back, please? So the narrative structure of the assessment starts with one point, that Africa has a unique and extremely diverse biodiversity potential. It's one of the most diverse in the world, and it's very exceptional. But this potential is under great pressure. African natural resource assets are degrading. The previous presentation shows some aspects of it on water biodiversity, particularly marine biodiversity, but it's general. But despite those pressure and the loss, Africa has a lot of options and solutions, and it also has existing transformation frameworks that these options must come to strengthen and reinforce. And the objective that we think for Africa, and that also addresses one of the questions that was raised earlier, is to move toward an Africa-led, post-carbon industrial model. That means it must be a model, we must move toward the transformation of economy, the industrialization, but according to a model that would invest in ecological innovation. That means that we would need to be fundamentally based on it will have to be based on nature. And it will also have to be based on an inclusive form of governance that would include sets of actors in society. Sure that the asset, the three main components of nature's contribution, which are really materials of biodiversity, which are key to human development, of course. And we looked at the assessment looks at the diversity and the richness of the ecosystems, the flow of goods or services that are, and the utilizing nature at the same time that it is losing them. So that's, and the reason why we have this paradox is that the true value of biodiversity and the contribution of nature to people is underestimated in decision making in Africa. Okay. So this slide presents the abundance and diversity of resources. This one looks at energy. The previous one, this one now looks at this, the exceptional ecosystems of water ecosystems in Africa, the outstanding number of very large transboundary river basin, and it's maybe related to my connection, which is very unstable. I'm sorry. So Africa has 3 of the 4 most productive LMEs. The LMEs are large marine ecosystems in the world with the potential estimated at 139, about $140 billion a year. So fishermen, West Africa is one of the most important, fishing areas in the world. In 2000, they had tons of fish, but the continent is rich. It has a lot of water, but also it is split between water-rich and water-poor areas, and we have something like 300 to 400 million people who live in water-poor areas, and fisheries are in decline as we talked. And in good part, it's because a lot of the catch also is diverted to outside of Africa. Next slide. So we look also, next slide, I'm not seeing it, but, Africa is also, as I'm going to speak like without seeing, the energy is very large. We have, abundant resources, oil, gas. We have a lot of clean energy, solar, wind, all those, but the poverty of access to energy on most of the continent is extreme. And we use a lot of firewood, hydroelectricity or solar energy. In DRC, only 9% of the population has access to electricity. Mining, it's among the first trillion, valorization of those resources for people. So the contrast is still, species. You look at the genetics, very diverse. The food and crops from African origin, very, very diverse. One of the most famous is coffee, of course. We have a lot of millets and cash crops. Shea butter is only produced in Africa, and so on and so forth. But on all areas, we have decline and loss, habitats, or no fertility or productivity. It's the same story. You can start, because this I can say it from memory. The fact that non-timber forest products are extremely important, particularly in a place like Zambia, it was representing almost half of the household income in rural areas. Over the world, there was in 2014, they estimated something like $90 billion of NTFPs, but Africa had only 6% of those. It's extremely and it's a great reservoir for producing value, and we can. So it's same. $35 billion just for rice, according to the. Now it's already dated, it's already getting old, but that's reality has not changed so much. The African paradox for an example for forests, where we represent Africa as only 3% of the global value added of forests in the world globally, and while it of the forest area of the primary forest area at 1%, the forest and other forested area, which is a broader category, but it has existing forest. Even a major forest importance when you look at tropical forests, because it's one of the last big tropical forests in the world. But at the same time, it has very little value, and the reason why the value is so little is because in value-added segments in industrial value-added segments of the forest industry. Third processing, processed products. Africa is only doing most of it of raw material, and that's different areas. Forest is a good example of it. When you look at the presentation. So when you look at just an example, in 2016, Africa, West and Central Africa had something like $1 billion of trade deficit for, timber, cane, bamboo, and wooden furniture, while for the same products, Asian countries were making $60 billion US of in the same period of profit, of benefit, and is making so much money, $7 billion in the same period with its export, because it's export, very polished, kitchens to the US, while Africa, while taking, consuming part of its raw material, taking it from Africa. So it's a contrast that is really representative of this disconnect between the importance of the wood resources in Africa and the way that it is not valued and it's not giving Africans enough benefit. And we know that generates 4 to 12 times more jobs than the primary activities that we are focusing on. So that's something that is very typical of the Africa situation. So, and this pressure is even more prominent because of climate change. which creates a lot of loss on African plant species, on bird and mammal species, on the productivity of lakes, at the same time that the population is increasing dramatically. And by 2050, publishing this was supposed to double by 2050. At that time, we will be, for people in the world. So we'll be the strongest population. And that means that we have to, what is to come. So we looked also, that I'm going to go very, very fast with this, on the drivers of change. At the options that we have, the fact that we have governance and system that exists today. They have already actions by African governments that are positive return on, including the importance of protected areas on land, on marine areas, like it was mentioned earlier. And the options include the fact that African population is young. And it's very interesting why we're having this with the youth summit. The youth is a great asset for Africa, but under the condition that we set up the strategy that will enable them to express themselves and be a force of transformation for Africa. Urban areas are still developing, and it's possible to innovate in the way we build our cities, even though today it's quite chaotic. But it's not done yet, and there are possibilities to move positively. The most important Africa is what we call the latecomer advantage. That means that we can use, we can leapfrog from the situation we are today to the next model, because the model globally for economic growth is not the most productive. There have been a lot of mistakes in the industrialization of the countries and the different continents that we are living with today. And Africa is then in a unique position to develop a different approach. Earlier, there was discussion about, blue economy. There are two conceptions of the blue endpoint of the marine area, blue, but you can also look at it from a, another standpoint. The green economy is has a few paradoxes. But if your economy is based on green orientation linked with local inventiveness, more shorter economic passes of transformation, so then it's it can be very productive. And so basically, besides the fact that Africa can accelerate its structural transformation by basing it on ecological options and right technologies, innovations. So you base it on nature, I'm going to move. That came from the assessment is that we don't have many researchers, a lot of policy making based on scenario making, and we would encourage you area, because we need to look at options to explore ways of moving tomorrow, and that needs to develop that. But there are a number of scenarios that still came out of the assessment. You're looking, more than 300 scenario studies that on Africa, and that looked at different options. Whether you're going to be based on what they call market forces, policy reforms, or something where more like a fortress world where security is preeminent, or whether we have scenarios based on sustainability, either regional or local. I don't know if